Today's episode is about appraisals and appraisal theories of emotion.
Hi, Professor Emotion here. Today we're going to be talking about appraisals. Okay, so what is an appraisal? Well, if you look it up on Wikipedia or in a dictionary, you'll find that an appraisal is an act of assessing someone or something. We typically use the word appraisal in the context of getting a home appraised. That means trying to figure out what that home is worth, what the value of it is. So an appraisal is sort of a fancy way of saying an evaluation. So what does this have to do with emotion? Well, appraisals pretty much have to do with thoughts.
Remember these 5 components of emotion? Subjective feeling state, physical sensations, thoughts, action urges, and expression. If you haven't watched the components of emotion episode, you might want to pause, go back and watch that one, and come back here. Because this episode is really going to focus in on thoughts. Thoughts are really about what appraisals are all about. It's the way that we interpret emotional events. So before we talk explicitly about thoughts, let's backtrack. Remember, I've talked before about how it seems like events are necessary for emotion. Here again, we're talking about emotions, not about mood or affect. And the way that people sort of intuitively think that emotions work is that events cause emotion. Events here could be external things. I have an action, I observe someone else acting, or internal events like I have a thought about something that's coming up or a memory. And the idea is that events cause emotions. That's intuitive. So you get promoted, you feel happy. Your dog dies, and you feel sad. It just makes sense that events cause emotion. The problem is not everybody responds the same way to the same event, do they? Have you ever been to a scary movie and seen how everybody's sitting in the same theater and some people are laughing when the creepy monster with a face mask jumps out at the protagonist? Some people jump in their seats, some people scream, other people seem like they do nothing. There are different emotional responses to the exact same event. So let's think about the events we've already talked about. Isn't it possible that someone gets promoted and they don't feel happy, but they feel scared? Maybe they're worried about how they're going to perform at this higher level. Maybe they're worried or scared about how they're going to manage people. Even a dog dying, someone might feel sad and they also maybe will feel relieved. Maybe their dog has been in pain for a really long time and now their dog isn't suffering anymore. A different emotional response from the same event. How could that happen if events cause emotions directly? Well, they don't, at least according to appraisal theory. And that's unfair to say appraisal theory because it's really about appraisal theories. There's a lot of appraisal theories of emotion. All of them share one thing in common. It's that events don't cause emotions directly, but they cause emotions through appraisals. So an event happens, we think about it, we appraise, we evaluate or interpret the situation in a particular way, and it's really that appraisal or set of appraisals that actually creates our emotional response.
So let's go through an example where 2 people are in the same hypothetical situation, but they experience very different emotions because of thinking about the situation, thinking about different aspects of the situation, and thinking about the situation in a different way. So let's say these people are on a blind date. A first date with somebody that their friends set them up with where they've never met this person in person before. And let's say the person looks like Taye Diggs. So person 1 sits down and has these kinds of thoughts. Wow, I cannot believe how attractive this guy is. Look at his smile. I was not expecting him to be so attractive. I'm so glad I let my friends set me up with this guy. If they're thinking something like that, they're probably going to feel something like excitement, maybe? Contrast this with person 2. Goes on the same blind date with the same guy, and instead notices when he comes in that he's kind of on the short side and thinks, ooh, I have a height requirement. This person is not as tall as I need. For me, I thought he was going to be taller. And now I have to sit here and talk to this guy for a couple of hours who I'm not going to want to see again. Ugh. Same guy, two very different thought processes, right? Second person is not going to feel excited. They're going to feel annoyed and angry. Maybe a little bit annoyed at their friends, maybe just sort of disappointed or disgruntled that they then have to spend a couple of hours on this date. These are different appraisal processes, different kinds of thinking about the situation.
You'll notice in that example that the different people were actually paying attention to different aspects of the situation. That's actually pretty important for appraisal because we can only actually evaluate the things that we're paying attention to. So whatever aspects of a situation we attend to are the ones that we're going to appraise. Attending to different aspects of a situation might lead to different kinds of appraisals or evaluations. So what we attend to matters. It also matters how we appraise or on what dimensions we actually consider appraising. So what I mean by that is there are different criteria on which we can appraise any given situation. So one of these is pleasantness. So essentially, how pleasant or unpleasant is the situation? We can kind of evaluate its goodness. We can also evaluate its goal relevance. How important is this situation to what I want? Does the situation matter? Remember that we tend not to have strong emotional responses about things that don't matter to us. So the more that a situation is relevant to our goals, the stronger an emotional response we're likely to have. We can also evaluate on a couple of other dimensions. One of them is novelty or expectedness. This is basically saying, how certain was I that this thing was going to happen? How novel, how new, how unexpected was this? How predictable? On the opposite side, you can think about someone thinking a situation was predictable, familiar. All of these have to do with how certain someone is about what's going to happen next. So something that's familiar or certain has different kind of repercussions than something that is new or uncertain. We can also appraise situations based on agency. This is basically about who caused this event or the situation. Was it me? Was I agentic? Did I do something to make this situation come about? Or was the situation kind of did somebody else cause it? This relates a little bit to control or power. So how much control in a given situation do I have over what happens next? How much control does the situation hold? So if you think about a natural disaster like a hurricane, there's not a lot of control that I might have as to what I can do next. The Mother Nature, the situation itself, is out of my control. Now, these aren't the only appraisal dimensions that exist. Appraisal theorists actually disagree on what are the most important appraisal criteria or appraisal dimensions. You might be getting the message that emotion theorists tend to disagree about a lot of things, which is true. But these are 5 that people seem to find again and again. So these aren't the only appraisal dimensions, but they are appraisal dimensions that seem to matter. So if you think about, let's deconstruct this example. Okay, you're on a blind date. The first person thinks about how they didn't expect him to be attractive and they're glad their friend set them up. Here we have appraisals of unexpectedness. They didn't expect him to be so attractive. That's pleasant. And you'll notice some agency in here. I am glad I let my friend set me up. Okay, this is basically them giving themselves agency. Together, these kinds of appraisals would make sense create an emotion of excitement. On the other hand, appraisals of unexpectedness in the bad direction, of thinking that they have no control and that this is unpleasant, those are going to lead to an emotion of annoyance. So where does this leave us with appraisals? A couple of other things I want to mention. One is that researchers have looked at how different sets of appraisals together tend to create particular emotions. So when you put the different dimensions together, you get a different specific emotion. So for example, when something is appraised as being unpleasant, uncertain, and outside of your control, but controlled by the situation, that tends to be associated with the emotion of fear. And you can look at how these appraisals go together in different ways to create different kinds of emotional responses. The other thing to note is that not every situation has to be appraised on every dimension. And we're probably not appraising every situation, every thought, every event on all of these dimensions. But it does mean we have a little bit of choice onto what kind of dimensions we're thinking about when we're thinking about these situations. And that's my last point. Appraisals can actually happen really quickly. So if you're sitting here listening to this thinking, well, I am not actually thinking about unexpectedness and situational control, I am just responding to the situation. Right, of course. Appraisals happen really automatically, sometimes unconsciously. Sometimes we're aware of our thoughts about a situation, and sometimes they're so habitual and so patterned that we're not actually tuned in to what we're thinking and how we're evaluating a situation.
I hope you can see that appraisals are really important for how emotions are created. They also have some really important implications for what we do with emotions once we have them. So we haven't talked a whole lot about emotion regulation or trying to change our emotional experience, but appraisal, or as it's called in cognitive behavioral therapy, reappraisal or reframing, can be a really useful method for changing an emotional experience. If that second person, rather than thinking about that they were stuck, could think about, well, I'm going to try to have a good time, there's something I can do, at least I can enjoy the food, they might actually feel less annoyed. So a lot of times when people say things like, well, look at the bright side, they're actually asking you to reappraise, to reframe the situation and see the positive aspects. I actually find that a little bit problematic to just look at the positive aspects. I do think, though, that it's important to be able to reappraise, to be able to look at the same situation from a different angle. And sometimes knowing a little bit about those appraisal dimensions of thinking about goal relevance, certainty, agency, and control, if we can look at a different appraisal dimension, or we can look at a different aspect of the situation, sometimes that can help us actually shape the emotions that we are feeling and change emotions that maybe we want to feel differently.